If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead no more than 15 minutes. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of the famous music duo Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall to the ground on August 30th, 2025, and then die as a result of his injuries on September 4th, 2025. This time-stamped email proves that this prediction that Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025 has been known since November 9th. We can see here the timestamp November 9th, 2024. On November 8th, 2024, we received the relevant prophetic signs related to Paul Simon. And as I wrote right here, God was pointing to November 8th ahead of time because Simon's death will point to Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. And this is the reason why Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. In short, the date 8:1 and 11:8 hint at Revelation 8:1 in the Bible, which describes a period of silence that was observed in heaven. Paul Simon's first hit was Sound of Silence. As I wrote right here, it is exactly 38 weeks between November 8th and August 1st, 2025, and Paul Simon is predicted to die at the age of 83, for which 38 weeks hints at. All right, the analysis that God was pointing to August 1st was 100% correct. However, Paul Simon did not die on August 1st. Instead, God provided clear and relevant signs related to Paul Simon, which revealed adding 34 days to reach September 4th. The prophetic sign we received on August 1st revealed adding 34 days to reach September 4th. There are countless other reasons for knowing that Paul Simon will die on September 4th. But the prophetic sign that we expected in advance of August 1st revealed adding 34 days to reach September 4th. The sign we received was the news report, the breaking of the news of the sale of the storied mansion in Los Angeles that was built for the most prolific TV producer in history, Aaron Spelling, and God uses extremes and records for his signs, who produced the longest-running drama series in history, Seventh Heaven. Paul Simon's most recent album is Seven Psalms, and his seventh solo album is the album Graceland, which is about a mansion. In his signs, God has been using this theme of mansions to relate to Paul Simon. This isn't the only example. For example, also, the sale of Paul Simon's mansion was a prophetic sign on July 1st, 2022. This sign right here is also the sale of a mansion. And like the sale of Simon's mansion, the price that it sold at was a prophetic sign. This sign here of Aaron Spelling's mansion sold for $110 million. Before I explain that, there is another connection that I forgot to mention between Paul Simon's Graceland Mansion album, his seventh album, and Aaron Spelling, who produced the TV series Seventh Heaven, which is that one of Simon's hit songs that was released from the Graceland album, The Boy in the Bubble, was inspired by Aaron Spelling's TV movie, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. This mansion sold for $110 million. And this is because Paul Simon is 9/11 symbolism in God's signs. God uses firsts for prophetic signs in general. And Paul Simon opened with a performance in the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after 9/11. Simon also performed at the 10th anniversary at the 9/11 Memorial. And Simon is known for being from New York City. That's why this mansion in this prophetic sign on August 1st, 2025, sold for $110 million. It sold for $110 million exactly 37 months after the sale of Paul Simon's mansion. 37 hints at 3 sets of 7. The Israelites were led by Joshua into the promised land and then enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security of ancient Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. Joshua died in the Bible at the age of 110. On 9/11, the Twin Towers were 110 stories before they collapsed, and then engendered a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, where George Washington was inaugurated. And through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington because Washington was inaugurated in Federal Hall and afterwards marched down Wall Street, as in the Israelites march around the walls of security of Jericho, into Trinity Chapel, today nicknamed the Miracle Chapel, because it was the only building that survived the falling debris at Ground Zero and survived without even a broken window, due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted in the process of sheltering the chapel. And today there is a 20-foot-high bronze statue of the roots of this tree to commemorate it for saving the chapel. And the reason why God pointed to this chapel that Washington went into is because inside the chapel, at the beginning, the founding of the nation, as in the foundation of Federal Hall being cracked, Washington consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings, which it temporarily did on 9/11, when 2 planes struck the 2 towers 17 minutes apart, and the towers were again 110 stories high. 2 planes 17 minutes apart hints at 2 times 17 equals 34. On 9/11, the Dow Jones Index was closed at 9,605.51. The 9,605 hints at 9 and 6 plus 5 equals 11, and it was closed 0.34 points above the previous day's close. In other words, 34 is a 9/11 number. Paul Simon is symbolism in God's signs for 9/11. On 9/11, 110 stories collapsed, and we have this sale of this mansion that is connected to Paul Simon that sold for $110 million, 34 days before it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall down, as in collapse of the towers, and then die as a result of his injuries on September 4th, 2025. It is predicted that on August 30th, Paul Simon will slip and fall, and then his injuries will lead to his death. And August 30th is 29 days after the sale of this mansion for $110 million, which, as I've now explained, hints at the 110 stories that collapsed on 9/11. And 29 is a number that God uses in order to hint at 9/11 through the use of only 2 numbers, 2 and 9, 29, which hints at 1 and 1 and 9, and therefore 9/11. One thing to add here is that Paul Simon is predicted to die as a result of falling, as a result of injuries incurred from slipping and falling. It is irrelevant the state of Paul Simon's health currently. That said, there is 0 news in the media regarding the state of Paul Simon's health. But like I said, it's irrelevant anyway, because Paul Simon is predicted to slip and fall and then die. Now, the reason for going into all of this is because it needs to be explained that in reality, or rather essentially, I predicted that Paul Simon would die on September 4th, back in November of 2024. Because again, as I explained here in this email that was written on November 9th, 2024, God was pointing to August 1st, 2025 for Paul Simon's death because of Revelation 8:1, as I explained. And I just now explained the trail of signs that led from August 1st to September 4th. And those signs were revealed through knowing August 1st ahead of time. Therefore, essentially, if you are reasonable and you have the eyes to see, I predicted that Paul Simon would die on September 4th, back in November of 2024. The reasonable person will recognize that this is true. I am predicting that on September 25th, 2025, a dirty bomb, a conventional bomb with nuclear material, will explode in New York City in Penn Station. And also, a dirty bomb will explode in the port of Los Angeles. In his signs, God is clearly communicating that this event will happen. It's just a question of whether or not this will occur on September 25th. I am predicting that Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom will die in a plane crash in St. Louis as they are traveling from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, in Busch Stadium in St. Louis on August 2nd, 2028. This will be during the predicted presidential campaign of Gavin Newsom. As a result of Gavin Newsom's death, Michelle Obama will become the Democrat Party's presidential nomination. Michelle Obama will, quote unquote, win the election over J.D. Vance on November 7th, 2028, and will become the president on January 20th, 2029. Donald Trump is predicted to run as J.D. Vance's vice president. This scheme to overcome the 22nd Amendment will backfire and inspire Michelle Obama and Barack Obama to run on the ticket with Barack Obama as Michelle Obama's vice president. She will then step down and Barack Obama will become the president again. It is predicted that there will be a massive Mary apparition on the beach in Rio, Brazil on April 24th, 2029. It is now recognized that there will be 2 massive Mary apparitions on the beach in Rio. The first of the 2 is predicted to be on March 22nd, 2029. These predicted Mary apparitions will not be secretive. They will be mainstream, worldwide news. Like all Mary apparitions in history, including at Lourdes, Guadalupe, and Fatima, this Mary apparition will be a demon pretending to be Mary. It is predicted that on April 26th, 2029, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the 5th trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens. The demons pretending to be aliens will claim to be here to help us with our nuclear weapons. It is predicted that Pope Francis will be resurrected from the grave on April 26th, 2029, and it is possible that on this day, Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist and 5G frequencies. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. The resurrection rapture event will occur on Pentecost on May 27th, 2029. On September 11th, 2029, there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit of Earth in the Indian Ocean. The greatest seismic effect of this will be felt on the other side of the globe, which is North America, and this will trigger an eruption of Yellowstone volcano and will cause the volcano in the Canary Islands to collapse into the Atlantic Ocean and send a mega tsunami towards the East Coast. It will also trigger the collapse of the Hoover Dam, which will cause a water panic in California, and many other devastating earthquakes. The day of the Lord the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, Judgment Day, will be at the end of 2031. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, this video is predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall on August 30th and then die on September 4th. This video is so amazing. Stay tuned, but I need to begin with establishing this right here. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly give an introduction here, a preface to the rest of this video that was produced prior to August 19th. Okay, so in other words, this was a prediction. This was the date it was at first thought that Paul Simon would slip and fall and then die 12 days later. It was recognized before noon on that day, or even earlier, that it wouldn't be the date. In other words, the day didn't come and go without it being first recognized that this was just going to be a step. You see all of these dates? This date was known ahead of time because it was, and this date was known ahead of time, and this date was known ahead of time because this is, because this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on a principle of steps and trails of signs. The full intended meaning of any of God's prophetic signs cannot be properly or fully understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs. Okay, and so God does this to establish these stories. God is telling these stories through the big picture of signs, which requires these steps. Anyway, August 19th was a step, okay? And it was very important, and we received the relevant, clear, related Paul Simon prophetic sign on this date. It's a long story, and it is so amazing. It is one of the most amazing things, actually. It will be explained in the Apollo 13 disaster video about Paul Simon. Make sure you watch the other video. But the sign here, long story short, the prophetic sign involved another boat. So this month of August, God has been using these boat or ship signs, including right here, for example, the water slide that busted, the slip sliding away sign on August 8th, which I've explained in other videos, and I'll explain later in this video. So we had another ship sign, and it was because of the shrimp that was recalled. Shrimp are fished on boats. They were from Indonesia, which is made up of 34 provinces. And God is, long story short, using the number 34 in association with Paul Simon because of the Hebrew idiom that's repeated in the book of Amos for 3 transgressions and for 4, which I explain in other videos and probably in this video later too. Okay, so it's radioactive. The shrimp were recalled because they are radioactive, and that's because it ties to the predicted dirty bombs in New York City and Los Angeles 4 days after the predicted death of Paul Simon. Now, long story short, this all pointed to Forrest Gump, which is a movie known for its soundtrack, which includes a Paul Simon, Art Garfunkel song, Mrs. Robinson, and that song itself is from a famous soundtrack. And the soundtrack, the Forrest Gump one, sold 12 million copies, which is confirmation for the 12 days here, but 12 is also 3 times 4 days. And again, these shrimp came from the country made up of 34 provinces. By the way, that's also relevant because the Indian Ocean tsunami emanated from Indonesia, made up of 34 provinces, and the chapter in the Bible that regards judgment on the world is Isaiah chapter 34. And of course, the Indian Ocean tsunami killed 220,000 people around the world, around the coastline of the Indian Ocean. So, so let me see here. So we have the shrimp recall here, and it was a Bubba Gump. It ties to Bubba Gump and Tom Hanks, who also starred in Apollo 13. And that ties, as I'll explain in the other video, to the Miami Dolphins, who won the Super Bowl and the MVP of the game of the NFL's only undefeated season in 1972 was player number 13, and on, as I'll explain in just a minute in this video. It's one of the most amazing things. Stay tuned. This, of course, is the date 1-3, which also hints at 13. Anyway, and long story short, this wasn't expected ahead of time, but this all connected to Apollo 13, which connects to the Miami Dolphins and the number 13 and the 85 Bears, as I'll explain, which is why this exact 85 weeks connection from this date 1-3, which hints at 13. Okay, so that's that. That's the introduction. For more information on this particular prophetic sign, in the must-watch amazing video that I'll be making, the Apollo 13 disaster video, and I'll explain more. But this is just to give you a brief introduction as to how this fits into this big picture here of this diagram, this most profound diagram. Make sure you watch all of this video. All right, now I was just talking about this connection here to August 31st. August 31st is also a step, or will be, because this is being produced prior to August 31st. It has been known for a long time that on August 31st, there will be this prophetic sign in the night sky. That's because with free downloadable software, anyone can look at the night sky at any time in human history, or any time in history, and we can see that there will be a prophetic sign here, which will be this conjunction between the planet Venus. In the Bible, Venus is symbolic of Jesus, and this M44 star cluster, the star cluster known as M44, which is also known as the Beehive star cluster. And Paul Simon prophetically opened the first Saturday Night Live broadcast after 9/11, and he is known for his Saturday Night Live participations, and there was one episode in the 1970s in which he was involved in the Killer Bees skit, just to tie in with Paul Simon and this beehive conjunction with the planet Venus. Now, God has been demonstrating these signs in the night sky that are symbolic of the rapture, when the Lord will come for his church, which is what the M44 star cluster is symbolizing. And so that's why this conjunction with Venus, which symbolizes Jesus, is a rapture sign. When Paul Simon is rapture symbolism in God's signs, for example, Paul Simon's hit Mother and Child Reunion, because the rapture sign is in context of a mother giving birth to a child in Revelation chapter 12. Hence this 12 days right here, incidentally. What we have here is from this M44 conjunction with Venus, an additional 4 days to the date that it is predicted that Paul Simon will die on the 4th of the month, and 4 divided by 9 is equal to 0.44. And the reason for all of this is because the number 4 is associated with Paul Simon and God's signs. And I'll just give you one example because I repeat this so often in all of the videos. But the Hebrew idiom in the Bible for 3 transgressions and for 4, which means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment and destruction is unavoidable for America, because Paul Simon is symbolism for America, and the warning on 9/11 was a Paul Simon sign. Part of it was Paul Simon. Paul Simon also performed at the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 events at the memorial. And Paul Simon's 4th album with Garfunkel has the song America, and the album is named Bookends. That's because Paul Simon's song Slip, Slide, and Away from his 4th solo album is Slip, Slide, and Away, and Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the warning that began on 9/11 for America to repent and turn back to God, and this period of grace and warning has now slidden away. And that's why Paul Simon will die 4 days after this M44 conjunction with Venus. And so anyway, the rest of this video is astounding. I just wanted to update it with this new insight regarding these 2 dates right here. Also, as will be explained in the other video, this sign on August 19th pointed to the movie Forrest Gump, and it'll be explained how that movie ties in more detail anyway to Paul Simon. And this movie and its soundtrack, which includes the song by Simon and Garfunkel, was released in 1994, as in 94, which hints at the date 9/4, the date on which it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. All right, welcome. This video is predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall on August 19th, 2025, and then will die on August 30th, 2025. Now, this diagram was made prior to it being thought that his death will be on the 30th and the first news will be reported on the 31st. Either way, he will die on August 30th or 31st. Okay, but first he will slip and fall. Now, the post date you are watching this video proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time. The video you are watching was posted prior to August 19th. That said, the knowledge that God has been using Paul Simon in his signs for a very important reason, and specifically the timing of his death, has been known for many years. Okay, and as I explained at the beginning of the video, it's been known that he would die in this month of August since November of 2024. All right, and let's see. To the skeptic that will say, well, I must have made videos for every day of the year in hopes that he would finally die on a particular date. That's completely irrational and crazy, and that means and only a crazy person would do this, and so someone who concludes this is actually the crazy, irrational person. Okay, furthermore, Simon could live another 7 years. There's absolutely zero news in the media regarding his health. Furthermore, as I'm predicting, his death will come as a result of his fall. Okay, and so it's not possible, but also this diagram is an example of how it's not possible to make these videos with these explanations for how the prediction is known ahead of time. As you'll see, none of this could have come from the imagination of a human being. No one could concoct these reasons for every day of the year in hopes that Simon would finally die, okay? As you'll see, these reasons, the explanation for this diagram here will prove that all of this is from God. And incidentally, that will be the purpose of the prediction that is from God. It is to prove everything that I'll be saying in this video regarding all of these explanations for how these dates are known. And I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God and why he has given me a voice through this prediction. It is to prove the things that I'll be saying in this diagram, but also the controversial things I'll be saying along the way. And that is the purpose of the prediction. I know more than you the reason and purpose for the prediction. It's because these controversial things that I'll be saying are proven to be true in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, and this big picture of signs, patterns, and connections will be proven to be true when the prediction comes to pass. Case closed. Okay, let's begin here with this August 19th date. So Paul Simon is predicted to slip and fall on this day, and he has a big hit, Slip Sliding Away, okay? That's his one of his famous hits, Slip Sliding Away, and this hints at him slipping and falling. All right, now the song comes from the fourth album with Columbia Records, his fourth and final album with Columbia Records. Columbia in itself is a name that God is using in his signs to symbolize America. Paul Simon symbolizes America. He has, for that matter, a big song named America, and also American Tune. And the song America comes from Simon and Garfunkel's fourth album, Bookends. Well, let me say this before I explain the bookends. Okay, but we have the connection between the fourth solo album and the fourth Simon and Garfunkel album. This is one reason why God is associating the number 4 with Paul Simon signs. But before I get into the prophetic significance of bookends, it needs to be established the beginning of the bookend. Bookends come in twos, the beginning and the end. The beginning is 9/11, and Paul Simon in God's signs is symbolism for 9/11, the events of 9/11 in 2001. After 9/11, Paul Simon performed, and I believe, if I recall, opened the broadcast after 9/11. The first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after 9/11, Paul Simon performed, and if I recall correctly, he opened the broadcast. He also performed at the 10th anniversary at the 9/11 Memorial. And he is also from New York City. Paul Simon in God's Signs is symbolism for 9/11. 9/11 was the massive warning from God of judgment and destruction. It was a warning. Paul Simon's death will also be a warning, because Revelation 8:1 describes a period of silence in heaven, and Paul Simon's first big hit that launched his career was Sound of Silence. The sound of silence in heaven in Revelation 8:1 is the warning, if you will, before the 7 trumpet judgments that follow it. The 7 trumpets of judgment and destruction. Paul Simon's best-selling solo album was his 7th solo album. His newest album that he's recently toured performing is 7 Psalms. And also, Simon is known for a hit, Late in the Evening, which is a name in itself that hints at the coming judgment destruction because of the idiom that Jesus said that coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. And this is why on 9/11, Flight 11, with a crew of 11 people, flew into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York City, the 11th state in New York, the 11th state to join the Union, and New York City is made of 11 letters. And again, this is because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out. As in last chance for America to repent and turn back to God. Since 9/11, this opportunity to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment destruction, has been sliding away. And the bookend to the opportunity to repent and turn back to God, which was warned of through the 9/11 events, will be Paul Simon's death. Paul Simon's death will symbolize the bookend to the opportunity that has slidden away for America to repent and turn back to God. One last thing I forgot to mention is that the Late in the Evening song heavily uses trumpets. So that's why the 7 trumpet judgments follow the sound of silence in heaven. This is so profound. It's hard to describe. And so one other thing too, Paul Simon's first, and God uses firsts and lasts for prophetic signs. Speaking of his last record with Columbia Record, the 4th record album, the first one with Simon and Garfunkel was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week. This gives us a 4 and a 3. This is because of the repeating idiom in the book of Amos. And God used Paul Simon and the agent that signed Simon and Garfunkel first, Wally Amos, the founder of Famous Amos Cookies, who lured them into his office with cookies. He died at the age of 88. Famous Amos died at the age of 88 on the prophetic Hebrew calendar date last year, and that hinted at Amos, the book of Amos, chapter 8, which begins with a description of the basket of summer fruit. And the baskets of summer fruit appear in August, and the beginning of Revelation chapter 8 begins with the sound of silence, and that's Paul Simon, because of his song Sound of Silence. Well, also, Paul Simon has pointed to the book of Amos, chapter 1, with its 15 verses, because Paul Simon's prophetic dream that he says contained a voice that instructed him to make the album 7 Psalms the dream occurred on the date 115. Anyway, in that first chapter, with its 15 verses, is this repeating idiom for Hebrew idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4. And that's another reason why God is associating the number 4 with Paul Simon, because this idiom in English, or rather this idiom means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable. And that's why Paul Simon's death will symbolize the bookend. In other words, the time and opportunity has slidden away, and now the bookend has come, and the warning from Paul Simon, the warning with Paul Simon's death will communicate that the limit of transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable, hence the 7 trumpet judgments that will follow the death of Paul Simon. And so this gives us 3 and the 4, which is what's contained in the first album, which, by the way, contains the song Sound of Silence. But this 3 and 4 is interesting because 34 is a number in 9/11. Because two planes struck the two towers 17 minutes apart. 2 times 17 is 34. Also, the Dow didn't open that day, but during that day, it was closed at 9,605.85, I believe. Anyway, the point is that the 9,605 hints at 9/11 because 6 plus 5 equals 11. But also, the day before, the closing day before that day, which was a Monday, because the 9/11 events occurred on a Tuesday, the Dow didn't open, but on the Monday, it closed 34 points above the previous close on the Friday. Anyway, the point is that 34 is a 9/11 number, and that's contained in Paul Simon as well, which also leads us to this for 3 transgressions and for 4, and the big underlying purpose and meaning of the Paul Simon signs and the timing of his predicted death after he is predicted to slip and fall. Now, Slip, Slide, and Away again comes from the 4th solo album, the last one with Columbia Records, and his death is predicted to be 4 plus 4 plus 4 days later, or at least the news of his death. This is 12 days, and that's because Paul Simon is also Revelation chapter 12 symbolism, because of the river of water that's used by the dragon to attempt to drown the woman who had just given birth. Paul Simon has a big hit, Mother-Child Reunion, and also Bridge Over Troubled Water. Anyway, so let's start this diagram here. Now, speaking of that, Revelation chapter 12 is a rapture. The first part of this chapter is a description of the rapture, or rather it symbolizes the rapture, including the sign that's described, the great heaven, the sign in heaven that's described in the first verses. That's actually a sign that was fulfilled in the night sky on September 23rd, 2017, a once in human history alignment of the stars. That's another story though. But anyway, therefore, Paul Simon's death, because he is also symbolism for Revelation chapter 12 and the woman who gives birth, which is the metaphor for the rapture in that chapter, connects to the rapture on Pentecost in 2029 with exactly 195 weeks. Now, 195 is the 23rd plus 23rd plus 23rd semi-prime number. And God pairs 23 and 44 together in his signs, which is why we have this 444% of a year connection right here, this 23 days connection right here, and also this 4 plus 4 plus 4 days connection right here. Okay, now the way in which God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel, it works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required, and this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which God would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 23 and 44. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning till night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. And essentially, the basketball president wore number 23 in high school and was the 44th president. That's just, the basics. And so that's the foundation, if you will, of the big picture of signs, is identifying the Antichrist. And specifically, and if we think about it, if God were to provide second witnesses for us, like I said, he would pair certain numbers together, and that's why he pairs these certain numbers together, 23 and 44. All right, now, so that's out of the way here. Let's go back this way, though. So this date right here, January 3rd, 2024, was recognized ahead of time. All right, because of this connection right here. I knew that God was pointing to this date right here, this 1-3 date in 2024, in relation to Paul Simon. In fact, prior to this date, it was thought that Paul Simon could possibly die on this date because God was overwhelmingly pointing to it. Now, one reason why is, again, this connection right here, but also this date, the date 1-3, hints at 13. And this was recognized ahead of time, that this date hints at 13. And the number 13 is associated with Paul Simon in his signs. Okay, and one reason being is that Paul Simon symbolizes America, and the number 13 symbolizes America. It was founded on 13 colonies, and the 13 colonies in themselves hint at the 13 tribes of Israel, because the tribe of Joseph was divided into 2, and Ephraim and Manasseh, long story short, symbolize the UK and then also the America, the younger of the two siblings, which God made a point of demonstrating in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, that the younger one would receive the inheritance. Well, anyway, so this was recognized ahead of time. Also, Paul Simon is now currently living, incidentally, near San Antonio, which is where the Battle of the Alamo took place, and that was a 13-day siege. That's another big 13 in association with Paul Simon. Okay, so, but on this day, as we expected, we received a number 13 sign. Oh, and also the Bridge Over Troubled Water album was the big album of the year, etc., at the 13th Grammy Awards. Well, anyway, so this Miami Dolphins player, Tyreek Hill, had the roof of his mansion catch on fire. All right, now Tyreek hints at Tyre, and in the Bible, this ancient city, and its success and prosperity and security was reliant on how it was an island in the Mediterranean surrounded by ocean, just off the coast of the eastern Mediterranean. And that's symbolism for America, because America and Great Britain likewise had this same prosperity because of its oceans that separated it from Europe in the case of the UK and also America. Okay, and so that's why Tyre is symbolism for this. And also Tyre is mentioned in a prophecy that also specifically refers to America and the UK, which is the Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish. Tarshish, there's all kinds of ancient as evidence that Tarshish was referring to Great Britain. Anyway, so Tyreek Hill, well, the Antichrist, his name is Bama, and in Hebrew that means high place. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that, because also the number of this player is number 10, and this occurred on the date that I said a minute ago hints at the number 13, but it is also a date, which means it hints at the date 1013, which is the birth date of Paul Simon. And Paul Simon was born in 41, and 41 is the 13th prime number. Okay. Okay, so I just had to pause the video there, and I think where I left off was the date here for Paul Simon's birth. Okay, so what we had here, the reason for all of this, the reason for the mansion, well, first of all, it was a mansion. Paul Simon is associated with this theme in God's signs regarding the mansion. Paul Simon's best-selling solo album was Graceland, which is named after the Elvis Presley mansion in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay, and so this is associated, and furthermore, there's been other mansion signs in God's signs regarding Paul Simon, including the sale of his own mansion in Connecticut. Okay, now, so we had a fire in the roof. By the way, that's rapture symbolism, the fire in the roof. It's Pentecost symbolism because of the tongues of fire in the upper room on Pentecost, and on the first Pentecost in Mount Sinai, the fire and smoke coming down on the mountain. That's why the name Hill here, by the way. The hill also hints at this Pentecost theme here of the fire at the roof of this mansion. But the big underlying thing about this is the fact that he plays for the Miami Dolphins. And again, ahead of time, it was recognized that this date was significant because of the number 13. Now, it's been known for years that the number 13 has been associated in prophetic signs regarding the Miami Dolphins. Why is that? Well, the big reason for this, including other signs that aren't just this sign on this date 1-3 that hints at 13, but the reason for the 13 association with the Miami Dolphins is because of the 85 Bears, the 1985 Bears. And incidentally, 8 plus 5 equals 13. Now, the 85 Bears almost had an undefeated season. It was 13 years after the Miami Dolphins' undefeated season in 1972. The Miami Dolphins are the only team in history to have an undefeated season. And in that year, in 1972, they won the Super Bowl, and it was player number 13 that was the MVP. Well, 13 years later, the 85 Bears were threatening to become the second team with an undefeated season. And they were completely dominating the league, and they did. They dominated every other game except for this one game because of their defense, because they had a revolutionary style of defense that the other teams couldn't counter. Okay, so they completely dominated, the shutout every other team, except for the Miami Dolphins, who had, at that time, a very unique style of offense, which was able to overcome the Bears' defense. And it was a Monday night game. I was a Miami Dolphins fan as a kid. The first video I ever recorded in a beta video machine was this game. And I watched this game. And now I know why. It was because it was meant to be. All my life has been set up for this video right here, if you will. Okay, and so I know this game, and that's how I know this prophetic sign. If it weren't for me in that place that I was, back when I was a kid, I wouldn't have been able to recognize this. But, okay, so it was week 13, and the offense was led by player number 13. It was the quarterback for the Dolphins that was able to counter the defense of the Bears. Player number 13 in week 13, 13 years after the Dolphins had an undefeated season and won the Super Bowl with the MVP number 13. And the 85 Bears also hint at 13 because 8 plus 5 equals 13. So that's why 13, okay? Now, the thing about the 85 Bears is this is the reason, Barack Obama hosted the 85 Bears at the White House because back in that day, it wasn't tradition for winning teams to always visit the White House after they win. And so Obama, being a big Chicago Bears fan because he's from Chicago, decided to host the 85 Bears. That rubbed the nose of the 72 Dolphins the wrong way. And so because at the time of the hosting of the Bears, Barack Obama said that the 85 Bears were the best team in history, and arguably they were, except that the Dolphins were the only team to have an undefeated season. And so Barack Obama then subsequently also hosted the 72 Dolphins at the White House. As he joked at the time, I really don't mind having both teams here. I love these sorts of things. Anyway, so that made this prophecy complete. Now, why did God point to the 85 Bears? Well, that's because 85 was the year that Obama moved to Chicago. And God is using Chicago and his signs in general to identify the Antichrist, the president who is from Chicago. Now, in 85, Obama moved to Chicago because the May 19th Communist Organization, which that's the name of the organization, the May 19th Communist Organization, disbanded. And he was a member of it. And the May 19th Communist Organization, incidentally, was responsible for bombing the Capitol building in 1983. And that was 15 days, which is the equivalent of 21,600 hours after the Barak bombings in Beirut. Now, 21,600 hints at 216, which is 6 times 6 times 6, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. But also, Barack Obama was born on the 216th day of the calendar year, and the name Barack is equal to 216 in English gematria. And that gets us, the name Barack connection gets us to the Barak, as in Barak bombings in Beirut. And Obama hints at Obama. And so the Barak bombings hint at Barack, which gives us the connection, which hints at 216, to the Capitol building bombing. And that's confirmation from God that Barack Obama was, in fact, a member of the May 19th Communist Organization at the time that it bombed the Capitol building. And we know also that Barack Obama was a disciple, if you will, of Bill Ayers, who, by the way, said openly, publicly, that he wrote Barack Obama's autobiography, Dreams from My Father. It's not even a conspiracy. You can see Bill Ayers saying that he did so, and of course he did. They conceived together the plot to make Barack Obama a politician, hopefully making him the president one day, but their success, I'm sure, exceeded their expectations. But Barack Obama all along knew that he wanted to become the president. Why? Because they are communists, and they plotted to bring down the system. That's what communists do. And once a communist, always a communist, unless they have a Christ-changing moment and are born again. Okay, and so that's Barack Obama. That's who he is. That's the truth about who he is. And he moved to Chicago because his real biological father, Frank Marshall Davis, is from Chicago. Frank Marshall Davis, a communist, moved to Hawaii to head the communist movement in Hawaii. He moved from Chicago. And Barack Obama's grandfather, Barack Obama's mother's father, was a CIA agent moving around the country disguised as a furniture salesman, and then was moved to Hawaii to monitor the activities of the communist movement in Hawaii. Now, that's how Frank Marshall Davis and Barack Obama's mother's paths crossed. He seduced her when she was 18. And then because of the threat to Barack Obama's grandfather's employment with the CIA, there was an attempt, and abortions were illegal, and the first state to legalize it wasn't coincidentally Hawaii, because it hints at all this, because ironically, had abortion been illegal, Barack Obama wouldn't exist today, the Antichrist. Well, anyway, to disguise this as a real act, to divert the attention from Frank Marshall Davis, Barack Obama's grandfather had one of the students from Kenya in a CIA program to counter communism in Kenya, studying in Hawaii, to Barack Obama Sr. He arranged it that Barack Obama Sr. would play the role of the father. And he agreed because he wanted to stay in the country to pursue his doctorate. And that's why, by the way, Barack Obama Sr. and the mother never spent any time together, because they weren't a real couple. However, to make it look real for immigration, they decided to go to Kenya and have the baby, which is why Barack Obama was indeed born in Kenya. Okay, so just to give you all the background of the significance of the 85 Bears, he moved to Chicago as a result of all of this, what I'm just saying, right? But also, the 85 Bears won the Super Bowl in '86, which began a 30-year cycle in which all of the major sports teams in Chicago won their championships. And in the Bible, a 30-year period is symbolic of a king. Joseph and David were made kings at the age of 30, and so their 30 symbolizes a king, 30 years, and this hints at the Antichrist king, who is from Chicago. Now, the culmination of that 30-year cycle was the win of the Chicago Cubs. And these teams, by the way, ended their droughts and long sports curses, in fact, in the case of, for example, the Chicago Cubs, the curse of the Billy Goat, which hints at the Goat Antichrist, and that World Series, I should say, was extremely prophetic and pointed to Barack Obama. Long story. Well, anyway, they visited Barack Obama at the White House. Speaking of the 85 Bears visiting Obama at the White House, they visited Obama at the White House 4 days before the 44th president left office, and star player number 44 presented Barack Obama with jersey number 44, Anthony Rizzo, which is Spanish for rice, and that's because that's symbolism for the coming food shortage that Barack Obama will preside over and enforce the mark of the Antichrist to only those who have taken, through the rationed food, to only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. Long story short. Okay, well, anyway, as you can see, this sign here pointed to the 85 Bears, and that's why it's astounding beyond words that we have this exact 85 weeks connection from this 85 Bears sign right here. Okay, so like I said, this connection was known ahead of time, and that's because of this connection right here, this exact 500 months, which led us to this 50th prime number. Now, somehow I knew January 3rd through another means, and then it was confirmed with the fact that this 229 days is the 50th prime number, which is confirmed with this second witness, which is this 500 months. And like I said earlier, the way in which God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works is it works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter. Okay, no, why don't we just rewind all the way back to here to begin with? This was the day of the release of the song Homeward Bound. And Lord willing, Paul Simon, when he dies, will be homeward bound. Okay, and now 188 months exactly from the release of this Homeward Bound song, this famous song by Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, is this prophetic reunion in Central Park with the Simon and Garfunkel reunion concert. 188 because God is using this number frequently in his signs because it points to H188 in the Hebrew concordance, which is the word that means woe, exclamation mark. And it is the woes that follow the sound of silence in heaven in Revelation chapter 8, which Paul Simon's death will hint at. Okay, now another example of 188, in speaking of Paul Simon, who is symbolism for 9/11, 9/11 was the first time that a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital in exactly 188 years, when the British landed George Washington's Mount Vernon estate and then proceeded to burn down the Capitol building and the White House, but not before Dolly Madison rescued Washington's portrait. So that's the 108 months here, but also there was a prophetic sign on March 6th, 2024, which was exactly 188 years after the end of the 13-day siege at the Battle of Alamo when the walls of security were breached. And that's a theme in 9/11 too, because of the collapse of the towers, the walls of security, and Wall Street that was pointed to through the 9/11 events, which I explained in other videos. Well, anyway, so this gets us to the Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel reunion concert in Central Park, which may have at the time attracted a record attendance, but is one of the highest attendance concerts in history. It attracted 500,000 people. The name Paul Simon is equal to 500 in Hebrew gematria. The concert raised for Central Park $50,000. Paul Simon's only solo #1 hit was 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. The name Paul is equal to 50 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. Also, the song Graceland is about him traveling down the I-55 highway to Memphis, to the Graceland mansion. And that mansion in Memphis is connected with the I-55 highway to Chicago. And the wickedest evil king in Bible history, in Israel's history, ruled for 55 years. And the mansion is for the king of rock and roll in Memphis, Tennessee, which is named after Memphis, Egypt, where the king would have been. And so the king's, Elvis is the king's mansion, is symbolic of the king's palace, and on and on. And, okay. So now, so exactly 5, and also the word Antichrist in the Greek concordance is G500. This gets us to 7 Psalms, the release of the album 7 Psalms, Paul Simon's newest album, which its theme of which is of passing, transitioning into the afterlife. Similar theme to Homeward Bound. Okay, and again, this gives us the 50th prime number to this sign right here, and so you see how it all connects. Okay, this is a really profound string of signs here. The thing is God's true big picture, God's prophetic signs cannot be properly and fully understood without their connections and context with the other prophetic signs. And it is through these connections that God is able to tell these stories and communicate knowledge, which he wouldn't otherwise be able to do with isolated signs. It's the same with the same way with the Bible. The Bible is not meant to be isolated and isolate verses, passages like many Christians do. And also, one can take an infinite number of ways, pathways through the Bible. Well, the same as with God's big picture of signs. They're all interconnected. And so it's a big picture. And it's like a web, if you will. They're all interconnected. But it's through the connections that God's able to tell these stories and information. Okay, well, 7 Psalms is exactly 9 plus 9 plus 9 months, which is also 2 years and 30 days, which hints at 23. It's a pairing of 9 and 23. But Homeward Bound is 2 minutes and 30 seconds, which gives us a pairing of 23 and the 9 plus 9 plus 9. And as I mentioned earlier, God pairs certain numbers together, like 23 and 44, but another number that he pairs is 9 and 23. And that's because the basketball president who wore 23 was inaugurated in 2009. Also, the mark of the Antichrist is, the inverse of it, is described in the book of Ezekiel chapter 9, and it alters a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes. Okay. Another way these things connect is this 7 Psalms album release was 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days after Paul Simon's prophetic dream, in which he says a voice instructed him to make a new album and name it 7 Psalms. And when the journalists come over to his studio and interview him, he shows them the framed piece of paper that he wrote on after the dream, and it has the date 115. Okay, and the number 4, as I explained earlier, is associated with Paul Simon and his signs. I explained all that earlier. And so that's also why this exact 115 weeks, because again, as I explained earlier, it points to Amos chapter 1 verse with its 15 verses. That's a typo. It's chapter 1 with 15 verses, in which the idiom is repeated for 3 transgressions and for 4, which means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been reached and judgment is now unavoidable. Okay, now on this day, we expected a Paul Simon sign because of this and many other connections. And we also indeed thought that Paul Simon would die on this day. It made perfect sense, since Revelation 8:1 is about the sound of silence in heaven. And, Paul Simon, had he died on this day, it would have pointed to Revelation 8:1 because the date is 8:1. But it was another step. And again, it is the steps and these connections that God is able to tell these stories. And we wouldn't have had this story right here had Paul Simon died on this day. And had we not had this sign, we wouldn't have known that Paul Simon will slip and fall before dying. Okay, so it's amazing how it all works in the end. Now, on this day was the sale of the storied mansion, another mansion sign in Los Angeles, which since had fallen angels. And and God uses records and extremes for signs. The mansion was built for the most prolific TV producer in history, Aaron Spelling, who produced the longest running drama series in history, Seventh Heaven. Paul Simon's best-selling album was Graceland, and his new album is 7 Psalms. And that's all confirmation for adding the 7 days. Also, Paul Simon's associated with Aaron Spelling because the third song on the 7th album is Boy in the Bubble, which was inspired by Aaron Spelling's TV movie, Boy in the Plastic Bubble. Okay, so that all points to the 7 days connection, which also got us to the date 8/8, another date that was overwhelmingly pointed to by God. And on this day, we had these slip, slide, and away signs. Okay, now God again uses records for signs, and the world's biggest cruise ship on this day, the news came out that the water slide broke at the top of it, the glass part seriously injuring the slider, the guy that was slip sliding away down the slide. All right, and also on this same day, the winner of a NASCAR race, while celebrating in Victory Lane, got up onto the roof of his car and then slipped and fell hard in front of the cameras and broke his collarbone. Amazing. Now, he was driving car number 88, and this was on the date 8/8, which hints at Revelation chapter 8, but also specifically Revelation chapter 8, verse 8, which speaks of ships, which is why the cruise ship sign. Now, the ship sign, the ships in Revelation 8:8 hint at, or is symbolic of America. And we know this because of Isaiah chapter 23, because of Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish and the ships of Tarshish. Because as I mentioned earlier, Tarshish is Great Britain in the prophecy, and the daughter of Tarshish is America. And the ships are what made America and UK powerful in the 19th and 20th centuries. And so it's symbolism, and it's Isaiah 23, and we have this ship sign, and that's why we add 23 days to get the date it's predicted that Paul Simon will die. But anyway, Paul Simon is predicted to fall and slip and slide on the date 8/19, and that's why this driver is known for only being 19 years old. And he drives car number 8 because it hints at the date 8/19, which is 11 days after this 8/8 date. And that's why this win in this NASCAR race was in the 11th state to join the Union, New York, where Simon is from. Also, 11 and 23 pair together in his signs to create 1123, which is the 188th prime number. And again, I explained how 188 is relevant because it hints at the woe, and they will follow the sound of silence in heaven, which Paul Simon's death will symbolize. And so the woes follow Paul Simon's death, in other words. All right, we're moving right along here. Now, this date 8/8 was also exactly 800 plus 800 days after this ship sign, which is also incidentally 4 times 400 days, which is a 44. But anyway, 800 plus 800 days, which pairs with this 230 weeks, and it's 444% of a year. I'm jumping ahead, though. Well, anyway, this was a ship sign. This was the day that the big cargo ship, I think it was an extreme record, maybe it was the world's biggest cargo ship, but it got stuck in the Suez Canal on this day, March 23rd, 2021, and it blocked the world's trade artery, preventing $9 billion a day in trade. God pairs 9, 23, and 44. This is 4 times 400, pairs with the 9 billion right here, okay? And also this 9 billion pairs with this 444% of a year to the date it is predicted Paul Simon will die. What's the significance of this? Well, the symbolism of the cargo ship that blocked the world's trade artery is symbolism because this occurred, the timing of it occurred at the time of the thing as it was being rolled out. People were very excited, and it was the early stages of taking the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist. And what that thing does is it clogs people's arteries. It was a warning from God for those who are with God and watch for God's signs. It's clear. I mean, that's what it was. It was a clogged artery. It was the world's trade artery, as the articles said. All right? And the number 9, by the way, is the most important number in God's signs. It's from the Bible. It symbolizes God's judgment. The mark of the Antichrist is God's judgment. And it is the mark of the Antichrist, incidentally. In its current form, it didn't need an additional false form of religious worship to go with it, or an additional technology. For those who are wise, it did come with a false religious worship, and also it does not need a supposed new age of dispensation after supposedly all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the main reasons why the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is in fact judgment for this particular doctrine. this doctrine of dispensationalism, which is the package that free grace comes in, or cheap grace, or once saved, always saved. And also the cousin of it, sovereign grace, which comes in the package of Calvinism. God hates these doctrines. They are the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day that Jesus said he hates, and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth of those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And make no mistake, I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction that Paul Simon will die and fall on these dates. It is to prove what I have just said. Case closed, end of debate. When it happens, no more discussion. It is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. And the commonly held objections that people have based on their understanding of Bible prophecy will be proven to be incorrect when the predictions come to pass. And I answer these commonly held objections at the end of the must-watch snake bite video on this channel. Okay, and as I said, this is the purpose of this prediction. I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction is to prove what I just said. It is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. Okay, now this date was exactly 42 months after the Revelation 12 sign, which is the rapture sign, which will be the escape from the coming new version, if you will, of the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, that's coming. And 42 months is mentioned in Bible prophecy 7 times as symbolic of the period of the Antichrist. And so the rapture will be an escape from the Antichrist. And so 42 months exactly later gets us the Suez Canal mark of the Antichrist sign. Okay? Okay. Now, let me see. Just 1 second here. I think the only connection remaining here is this exact 230 weeks connection to the day it's predicted that Paul Simon will slide away. And again, this 230 pairs the 440% and the 4 times 400 days. But also, like I said, Revelation chapter 8 and the ships in Revelation chapter 8:8 symbolize America, and that comes from Isaiah chapter 23. So God pairs 8 and 23, which is why, incidentally, the big Washington, D.C. earthquake occurred on the date 8/23 back in 2011. So, but anyway, and one other thing here is that slip, slide, and away comes from the 4th and last Columbia record sign. Columbus sailed on ships, and the slip, slide, and away sign on this day was the ship, as I mentioned, the cruise ship water slide sign. And the song was released on the album that was released in 77, which I forgot to mention because it's more confirmation of the 7 days connection here, which again connected from the 7th heaven, 7 Psalms, 7th album of Paul Simon sign. I explained that earlier. But what confirms that too is that Slip, Slide, and Away was released in 77. Now that wraps it up here for this amazing, profound video. Make sure that you never stop sharing this video, or at least one of the videos on this channel, everywhere you go. It's if you are a quote-unquote Christian, I should have said that way. It's just the habit of saying that way because of the other things I say a lot. But if you are a Christian, it is our obligation to work and to use our bags of gold. And this prediction is a massive bag of gold. Nothing compares to it in terms of an evangelism tool. And don't only share it in comment sections of where you always go. Go to where people who don't think like you. Go to where the enemy's sites. Go everywhere. Leave links to this video, change it up so you don't want to get into an algorithm where they're thinking you're spamming. But continue to do it though. Get the word out. And if you'd like the file for the flyer I hand out, please contact me. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, Nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.